Hi AP. Okay, let's review our part writing in root position triads, sheet number 1. If we look at the first row, there are 5 examples. Each one treats separately because of the double bar line. In the first measure, we have a GBD triad. And the next chord will still need to be GBD with the root G doubled. So the first chord is in close spacing, as is the second chord. We had to shift things down because the soprano went from a B to a G. In the second example, we are looking to build a DFA minor triad with the D doubled by the soprano. We need to add in our alto voice, which I put an F there because we want to retain the common tone, if possible, in one voice. And then we need the fifth, which the tenors can sing. In the third example, what we've done is gone from close spacing to open spacing. Notice that the bass and the tenor are singing the F, so the root is doubled. Alto will stay on the C, and soprano sings the third of the triad. In the fourth example, we go from open spacing to close spacing. The bass jumps up an octave, so it doesn't give us much room. Altos will stay on a G, and the tenors will go up to an E. So we have 2 Cs, 1 E, and 1 G. In the fifth measure, we need to build an A-C-E triad with the A, the root doubled, which we'll keep in the alto voice. Soprano is on the C, which is the third, and the tenors will sing the fifth, which is E. So hopefully you did okay with that section. This next section involves key signatures and Roman numerals. Okay, so the first one is just one measure because you see the double bar line in the key of D minor. The second example is 2 measures in the key of A major. And the third one is 1 measure at the end, which is B flat major. So, D minor. We have a DFA triad, that's a minor 1 in D minor, going to the minor 4 in D minor. Because our bass note is G, our triad must be G, B flat, D. Notice that our roots move from 1 to 4, so that's by the interval of a fourth in the bass. Therefore, we have one common tone we can retain in the tenor voice, so we'll leave the D there. We need to double the root, which is G, that the altos will sing. In the second example, I've done something a little bit different here. You might be able to figure it out. I did not retain a common tone in the same voice. So let's examine this further. We're in the key of A major. We have as our first half note triad, F sharp, A, C sharp, and F sharp being the root is the 6th scale degree in A major, so it's the minor 6 chord. The next chord is the minor 2 chord because the B is in the bass. B is the 2nd scale degree in A major. That triad is B, D, F sharp. The commonality between the 6th chord and the 2 chord in A major is is F sharp. And notice that in the first chord, the alto is singing the F sharp, as is the bass. In the second chord, I did not put the F sharp in the alto voice, although you could. This is another way that also works. So for some of these, there's multiple responses that work. I chose on the minor 2 chord to do open spacing. You could have just as easily kept the F sharp in the alto voice and put a D 4 in the tenor voice on that minor 2 chord. If you did that, then your 5 chord would have to be a G sharp in the alto, and an E in the tenor, an octave higher from the bass, doubling the root. And then we go from our 5 chord to our 1 chord. And you also notice that I did not keep the common tone in the same voice. That's also fine. It makes things a little bit more complicated, but it works. And you can see that in parentheses, that's the way you would resolve the alto on the E and the tenor on the C sharp if you did keep things in the same voice. For this one over here, we're in the key of B flat major. Our first triad is C, E flat, G. That would be the minor 2. Our next triad is the F, A, C, which is the major 5, followed by B flat, D, F, the major 1, traveling to E flat, G, B flat, the major 4 chord. So in this example, I've managed to retain the common tone from the first chord to the second chord in the tenor voice. That's the only common tone. And then moved the soprano and the alto to the nearest chord tone. Same thing from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. I've kept the common tone F in the alto voice and moved the soprano up and the tenor up to the nearest chord tone. In the 4 chord, from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, I do not have a common tone in the same voice. And the reason for that is because in the 1 chord, the soprano note given is a B flat, and in the 4 chord that follows it, the soprano note given is the G. So by the very nature of the example, we're unable to retain the common tone in the soprano voice. And the bass voice, because in the 1 chord, the bass is the B flat. In the 4 chord, the bass is the E flat. So we must shift all the notes so we cannot retain a common tone in the same voice from the 1 chord to the 4 chord. And in the 4 chord, the last chord of that, I have doubled the E flat with the alto, and the tenors are singing a B flat. Let's look at the next one. We are in the key of E minor. Our bass note is B. We have B, D sharp, F sharp. How do we know that it's a D sharp and not a D? The capital Roman numeral 5 gives us the answer, that this must be E harmonic minor. We need to make sure that we look at the 5 chord that goes to the 1 chord and try our very best to retain the common tone, which we have done in the tenor voice, the B. The root is doubled by the soprano, which is an E, and the alto is a G. Going from the minor 1 to the minor 4 chord, we have retained the E in the soprano as the other voices shift up to the nearest chord tone. And from the minor 4 to the 1, we have, again, the soprano retaining the E and the inner voices shifting down to the nearest chord tone. In this next example, which is just one measure, we're in the key of F major. Our first triad is F, A, C, that's a major 1. Our next triad, the bass is a B flat, making it B flat, D, F, which is the 4 chord, and it's major. followed by FAC, which is the 1 chord in F major, ending on a 5 chord because C is in the bass and we have C, E, G. Notice that I went from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, which is the bass moving by an interval of a 4th or a 5th in this case. So I'm able to retain one common tone in the same voice, that being the alto on the F, while the other voices shift up to the nearest chord tone. Going from the major 4 to the major 1, I have retained the alto voice, pitch F, and shifted the other voices to the nearest chord tone. Going from the 1 chord to the 5 chord, you can see what we did here. The 5 chord is already doubled with the C and the soprano, so we need to make sure to include the E or the G in the inner voices. And the notes in parentheses will also work. For the G major one, which is 2 measures long, notice I wrote a note at the top that the common tone is not retained in the soprano. So the 1 chord to the 5 chord, we were able to retain the D in the alto. The 5 chord to the 1 chord, we can retain the D again in the alto. The 1 chord to the 4 chord, the common tone is not retained in the soprano. So we don't have a common tone. And that's simply because that's the way, that was what was given to us. Ideally, we would want to retain the common tone in the same voice, but on the other hand, you do want a nice soprano melody. So you may come across this sometimes. And in our whole note, major 1, last measure, we have the root doubled, the tenors singing the 3rd, and the altos on the 5th. For the next one, we need to add the alto and tenor parts to each exercise using smooth voice leading. The first example is 1 measure in the key of B flat major. Our first triad has a root of G, making it the minor 6 in the key of B flat. The spelling of that triad would be G, B flat, D. The next chord in the bass, we have an E flat, making it an E flat, G, B flat, major 4 triad in the key of B flat. Shifting on over, we have a C in the bass, spelling a C, E flat, G triad, which is the minor 2 chord in the key of B flat major. Ending with a 5 chord, because F is in the bass, we must spell it as F, A, C. That's the major 5 in the key of B flat. Notice where all my common tones are. In the first 3 chords, they remain in the alto voice, and the other voices move to the nearest chord tone. In the last 2 chords, the minor 2 to the 5, I do have a common tone, and that's given to us in the soprano, while the alto and tenor voices move to the nearest chord tone. In the case of G major, which is 2 measures long, we start out with the 1 chord, spelling G, B, D, going to the minor 3 chord with a B in the bass, B, D, F sharp. Next chord, an E is in the bass, making it E, G, B, which is the minor 6th of G major. The last chord of that measure is A, C, E, which would make it our minor 2 chord. Followed by, in the next measure, a D in the bass. D, F sharp, A would be our major 5 chord. The dash means we carry it through. It's still a 5 chord. Ending on our half note, major 1 chord, G, B, D. So going from the major 1 to the minor 3 chord, that is the interval of a 3rd or a 6th depending on how you look at it. And when you have the bass moving by that interval of a third or a sixth, you can retain two common tones, as we have here, in the soprano on the B and the tenor on the D, while the alto moves down to the nearest chord tone. From your 3 chord to your 6th chord, that's the interval by a fourth. There is a common tone, but we're not able to provide a common tone in the same voice because of the soprano line. This is a case where you would move the tones to the nearest chord tone for smooth voice leading. From the 6th chord to the 2 chord, the bass moves by a fifth. Thus, we're able to retain a common tone in the alto and move the tenor voice down to the nearest chord tone. In the next measure, we have 2 5 chords. Notice that the first 5 chord is in open spacing, as is the second 5 chord. It's just up a little bit higher. And then we go from the 5 chord back to the 1 chord. I have tenor and bass doubling the G, which is the root, and I put altos on the D, the 5th. This last example is F sharp minor. F sharp is in the bass for the first triad, making it F sharp, A, C sharp. That's the minor 1 chord. Shifting on over to the major 6th chord, we have D in the bass, so we know the triad is D, F sharp, A. Over to the minor 4 chord with a B in the bass, making the triad B, D, F sharp. Ending on the 1 chord, just like we started, with F sharp, A, C sharp. Notice the alto voice is able to retain all of the common tones that exist in the chord progression. All of these examples follow the principles of voice leading. So I hope that you did a good job with this, and we'll continue to practice more